Hey, welcome to week 3 of our spiritual journey, supernatural power, not human ability. I've got a question for you as we kick off this video today. If you could be a superhero for a day, which superhero would you choose to be? Maybe the Flash, and you could get wherever you wanted to get as fast as you wanted to, not paying anything for gas. Or maybe you'd want to be Spider-Man and climb all over the place. I know my son would want to be that. Or maybe you want to be Wonder Woman and fly everywhere or be strong or whatever. But you would probably agree with me that maybe the most popular superhero of all time is Superman, right? Everyone knows the big S on his chest, and Superman is probably the most well-known superhero. We all love Superman and other superheroes because they're a projection of strength. Our natural tendency is to depend on our own strength, to lean into the things that we're naturally good at, to take off in a blur like Superman and handle things in our own way and in our own power. That's the kind of strength that's celebrated in our society. But Matthew 5:5 advocates for a different kind of strength and a different kind of living. Jesus said this. He said, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." The idea behind the word meek is a strength that's held under control. It's a quiet, steady strength. The word meek was used to describe a bridled horse, which is an amazingly strong animal that has given itself under the control of another. If you think about it like that, it makes perfect sense. No out-of-control horse is going to go and win a race. He can't. But a horse that submits to the power of its rider will have victory. This is the type of person that Jesus described. Someone who has abandoned his or her own control in submission to Jesus' control. In other words, it's someone who isn't trusting in his or her own ability or strength for daily living, but instead depends on God's supernatural power instead. That supernatural power for daily living comes from leaning in and listening to the Father. Becoming meek is the decision of the will that God's way is the right way, not mine, not yours. An attitude of meekness chooses to believe the only life worth living is a life that's deliberately and joyfully submitted to Jesus. We submit our lives to the will of God instead of expecting God to submit his will to our lives. And it's a win for us when we do that. The meek are given the earth. As with all the blessings we find in the Beatitudes, understanding they shall inherit the earth requires a big picture view, a big change from what we naturally think. If we're leaning into and listening to the Father as long as we live on earth, we have daily awareness of the life that is yet to come. Submitting to God in meekness is a blessing because it frees us up from being a slave to our earthly circumstances. And the supernatural power of Christ, we're not slaves to the earth. Rather, we receive every earthly moment as a signpost of our inheritance that is to come. And God is present with us, and he directs us toward that inheritance as long as we are listening to his voice. Thankfully, we have far more realistic and helpful examples of this supernatural power in action than Clark Kent. Moses leaned into the Lord and listened to him. And in doing so, God used Moses to lead an entire nation of people out of Egyptian slavery. David leaned into the Lord and listened to him as he was hiding in the cave from his enemies. He found strength in that moment and reflected in prayer when he cried out to God this way in Psalm 142. He said, "You are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living." David's own submission to God helped him see that wickedness has a definite end. He said this, he said, "But the meek shall inherit the land and delight themselves in abundant peace." You see, David saw that peace coming. Peter was a disciple of Jesus who was full of certainty in his own human ability, and this led over and over again to numerous very public failures. But when Peter learned to really lean in and listen and follow the Lord's leading for his life, the record took a distinct turn. God used Peter to lead the early church to faithfulness through their own trials and temptations. He wrote this in 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 6. Peter said, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while it is necessary you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in the praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." You see, Peter learned to see that the bigger picture and that God wanted him to see was that God uses trials of life for his holy purposes. Paul also learned to lean in and listen to and depend on the supernatural power of the Lord. He wrote about the blessing that God taught him about in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. When he wrote this, he said, "But he said to me," God said to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." You see, in submitting his will to God's, Paul found out that his weaknesses were actually an avenue for God's strength to show up. The kind of blessings that our culture cherishes and chases after, they're fleeting at best. That's all they can ever be because they depend on human ability and individual strength. The blessings of God are different, though. They don't depend on self or even on a collection of the best humans that we know or can find. The blessings of God come when we lower ourselves in our hearts and in our minds and lift Him high. When we do that, that's when we inherit the earth. To inherit the earth in the day-to-day means God gives you His perspective about the meaning for your life. You don't waste your time chasing all these unfulfilling, meaningless pursuits, but instead you engage with Him in His mission and His calling. To inherit the earth in the day-to-day means that you are equipped with the supernatural strength of God to face whatever difficult problem comes your way. You don't despair. You don't give up. You endure it all in a way that makes people want to know how and why are you doing that? To inherit the earth means the day-to-day experience that you have is the fullness of Christ's love in all of your relationships. The kind of blessings our culture cherishes and chases, they're fleeting at best. That's all they can ever be because they depend on human ability and individual strength. But the blessings of God are different. They don't depend on self or even on a collection of the best humans that you or I know or could even find. No, the blessings of God come when we lower ourselves in both our hearts and in our minds and instead choose to lift Jesus high. When we do that, that's when we inherit the earth. To inherit the earth in the day-to-day means that God gives you His perspective about the meaning of your life. You don't waste your time chasing unfulfilling, meaningless pursuits, but instead you engage with Him in His mission and in His calling. To inherit the earth day to day means that you're equipped with supernatural strength of God to face whatever difficult problem comes your way. You don't despair and you don't give up. You endure anything all the way so that you can experience His goodness. To inherit the earth in the day-to-day means that you experience the fullness of Christ's love in your relationships. You don't get hung up on all the different ways that people disappoint you because in your meekness and humble dependence on God alone, other people don't have the power to make or break your day. The greatest blessings in your life will always and only come from God's supernatural power, not your human ability. This is so difficult. So may we learn to listen for our Father's voice and concentrate on that. And when we do, we can place our confidence in Jesus, not in ourselves. He uses all of our difficult circumstances to wonderfully shape and direct our lives.